Hello, welcome to this video on misconceptions to do with analysis. Now, before we look at some of the misconceptions with analysis in English, we're going to look at a bad example first of all to show you what some of the problems are. So this is a student who's written a response to an extract from Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and they've written, the writer uses the quote, Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out, generous fire, secret, self-contained and solitary as an oyster, to show us how cruel Scrooge is. Now, this is a bad example, and the reason why it's such a bad example is I'm going to talk to you through it now. If you can have a look, that this quotation that they've taken from the extract is massive. It's a really long. So they've got a quote that is too long. But also, when they're talking about things, they've spotted something, but they haven't been precise. And that's one of the problems that students have with using quotations. They're not precise enough. So they've used, the writer uses the quote. Well, I'm going to talk about the choice of word quote later on, but actually they haven't really talked about what the writer's done. They've just taken a bit and called it a quote, and so they're not precise. And that's one of the things that we need you to be. We need you to be really precise with what. What is it that the writer is using? Is it a list? Is it a verb? Is it an adjective? So that's where your techniques come in. And then this little bit here to show us how cruel Scrooge is. So we don't know what the writer's done, but he's just used some words, and we've got this long quote, and then all this is showing us how cruel Scrooge is. Well, you could have said that about the whole piece, couldn't you? So the problem is that we've got several things here that's quite problematic for us, and when we're marking in English we struggle with a lot of these things. So we've got a lack of precision, not using the right terms, we've got too long quotes, and then we've got vagueness. So those three things are things we need to address when you're using a quotation. Okay, let's go through some of the problem areas and the misconceptions. Well, first one is using long quotations. Okay, don't use long quotations. If you have to, okay, try to go for a maximum of 4 words as a rule, but it's okay for your quotation to be 1 word long. That's fine. And in fact, it's great because if you do that, you can have more quotations, and it's much better to have lots of short quotations than lots of long ones. So kind of keep them really short and focused. The next one is a bit of a style thing. Now, we know inverted commas probably as 66 and 99, and we tend to use those for speech. When we're writing analysis, single inverted commas is just fine, and that's what we want to see. And in fact, it saves you amount of time and effort, really. There's less to write. The next thing is making sure that your quotation links to the rest of the sentence. Lots of students tend to have their quotation and then don't talk about their quotation in the rest of the paragraph. So you must make sure that you do that. The next thing is vague terminology. Now, what we mean by vague terminology is words like word, phrase, and sentence, because these are things that you've been talking to since the beginning of primary school. And so when we're in secondary, we want you to be a bit more precise with your terminology. And we know that you've been taught at primary school lots of technical terms, and with our core knowledge, we're working on those sorts of things. So these are the things that you need to make sure you don't use, because they could be absolutely anything. You can pick anything from a text and say it's a word, phrase, or sentence. We need to be really precise. So say, for example, the adjective, or you can say the noun phrase, or you can say the question is much better than word, phrase, and sentence. What these are pretty lazy, and we want you to avoid them, because they're lazy, because you don't have to think about the term and you just go, oh, it's a word or a sentence. So avoid those. The other thing, and this links to a previous one that we've talked about, is using a quotation on its own to support an idea. So for example, you say that, oh, Scrooge is cruel, and then you say, here's the quote that shows that he's cruel. That's it. No development. Okay, a quotation is evidence, and you need to explain your evidence in analysis for English. A bit like in a court, you would expect the defendant, the prosecution, or the defense to actually be explaining how the evidence proves whether somebody is guilty or not. And that's what you've got to do with quotation. You've got to prove your quotation proves your idea. And that's something you've got to work on. The other thing is another style thing. Okay, avoid using the word quote. Okay, it's best to say quotation. So that's what we want to avoid you from using, and don't use the word quotation. We also want you to avoid using quote or quotation instead of your terminology that you're spotting. Right, let's start looking at what makes a good one. So we're going to start off with our bad one. Now, if we have a look at our bad one, we can see there's lots of writing. We've already talked about this. We've got a really long quotation, okay, and very little explanation, and then we've got the word quote. Okay, let's have a look at our good example. So here we go. Very, very similar start. The writer uses a list of verbs. Straight away, that is much better. And the key word that we've got here is being precise. This is so vague. This one here, it's so vague. So we've got a list of verbs, which is more precise. What is the writer using? The writer's using a list and he's using verbs. Not precise here. Then let's have a look at our quote. And you can see that our quotation is 1, 2, 3, 4 words. Compare that to our quotation here. Okay, it's more than 4 words, isn't it? So actually, this person that's writing the bad example is wasting their time and writing lots of pointless writing that they need to do. They could have just reduced it down to 4 words. So the writer uses a list of verbs: squeezing, wrenching, grasping, and scraping. Tick. Now let's have a look at our explanation. So the bad explanation we had to show us how cruel Scrooge is. To suggest to us how all Scrooge cares about is money. So it's a bit more explanation, but there's a key word here that I want to draw attention to, and that is the word suggest. Shows is what's obvious. Suggest is talking about what's hinted in the text. Now we call this inference. And what this student is doing is really looking under the surface and trying to learn. Now it's not as developed, and I'd hope that the student with their next few sentences would build on this and extend on this explanation. But you can see that what we've got here is we've got precise term, precise quote, and a precise inference. And so what this student's doing is being really, really precise. They've written little, but it's more effective. And that's what we want. We want to save you from writing loads down, but actually make sure it's clever. Okay. Now, some of you might be thinking, oh, well, it doesn't look very fancy. Why doesn't it look fancy? Well, analysis doesn't need to be fancy. It's not like story writing, where you want to have a range of different types of words. Analysis is about showing your understanding. And actually, sometimes you need to be more clear with your writing with analysis than you do with story writing, because you're trying to make it clear what you know and what you think. So let's look at that again, that good example. So there are 3 parts. The first part is the spotting. What's the technique? The second part is the quotation. And then the third part is the explanation. And remember that word suggest. That helps us draw attention to an inference. Now, I'm going to show you two other ways of you could do things. So what you can do is you can reorder things and you can put them in a different way. Now, there isn't a set way to do this kind of analysis, but actually there are key components. So you're spotting, you're explaining, and you're quoting. Now, if we have a look here, we've got the one from the previous slide and we've got a different one. And you can see that actually you can move about the sentence and you can change things around. So what you could do is you could move your quote to the end. So the writer uses a list of verbs to suggest to us how all Scrooge cares about is money. And then we have a colon. Now colon, just very simple, 2 dots there. And what a colon does is it introduces something. That's what a colon does. And its job here is to introduce. And here it is, it's introducing a quotation. So you can have this really good idea here, and then you just put a colon, and then you put your quote at the end there. And then you write another sentence explaining it further. So if you can see, there are two ways. So one, how you fit your quote in, have a colon, and then your quote. The other way is that you can embed it into your sentence. So you can drop it in, making sure that it sounds right when you use it. Okay, so there are two ways that you can use a quotation in there. Right, now we're going to have a look at how you can develop things further. Now, your teacher is going to talk to you about squeals in lessons, if they haven't already. But I'm going to show you how you can take our little sentence that we've got here and how we can develop it a little bit further, okay, and use some of the squeals techniques there. So if we have a look, here's our sentence that we're used to now, but now what we can do is we can zoom in, and we're going to zoom in because we're going to now go Dickens's use of the verb grasping. So we've got our quote there, and now we're going to zoom in into a bit in there. So now, grasping gives the reader a sense that Scrooge is worried about losing his money. So it's quite good now because what we're doing is we're talking about the reader. So we're thinking about how this affects the reader. And we've got this good word here, because. Now, because is always a great word to have in your writing, because what it does is it makes you talk about reasons. Why is Scrooge worried about losing his money? Okay, because grasping means to desperately hold on to something. Okay, now again, look at that, another quote. So already in this little bit of writing, we've got 1, 2, 3 quotations in our writing, which is showing to an examiner or to somebody marking work that this person can use quotes, but also they can use them quite well. And if we have a look, it's a one-word quote, which is a really good thing to do and a skill to kind of get used to using, because it really helps you to explain things. Then the person talks about what does the word mean. And one of the things that students don't always do is talk about the meanings of words, because the meaning of words, everybody can do that. It's a really good skill, but actually it helps with your explaining, because what does grasping means? Okay, so grasping means to desperately hold on to something. So Scrooge worries he will lose his money, so he holds on to it as tight as he can. Okay, so here in this little bit of writing, if we put it all together, we've got a paragraph that has got a number of techniques that have been spotted. We've got quotations, and we've got quite a bit of explanation here. And we're doing all the right things. And if we go to our squeals and we have a look, and hopefully your teacher's taught you this, but doesn't matter, they can explain to you. So, have we spotted things? Yes, we have. Have we got some quotations? Yes. Have we talked about the effect of things? We're starting to do that here with the reader bit, but not quite there. So partly Have we done some explanation? Yes, we've done lots of explanation. That's all that purple stuff. Have we done any linking? Well, no, we haven't done any linking yet, or talked about symbols. So maybe that's where the student can go, and they can link it to something else, and they can talk about what this is a symbol of. So you can see how a paragraph can be built up quite easily from that first sentence. So let's go back to our misconceptions. So first things first, avoid using long quotations. Use short ones and think about 4 maximum and hopefully 1 word most of the time. Avoid using double inverted commas. Use single inverted commas. Make sure that you link your quotation to the rest of the sentence. Make sure it fits into it. Avoid vague terminology like word, phrase and sentence. Avoid using a quotation on its own to support an idea. You must explain. Your explanation is really, really important, and avoid using the word quote and use the word quotation instead. Thank you. That's the end of the video. Do go to YouTube if you want to watch that video again, or if you want to revise some of the things in it.